Welcome to the Further Light Podcast, presented by Wisconsin Freemasonry, helping you accomplish your Masonic goals through education and more light. And now I present to you Brother Chris Ludke with Matt Gallagher, author of Practical Freemasonry, Accessible Philosophy for Working Class Schlubs.
So you talk about the way the book is laid out. It's looking at these working tools from the various degrees. And so let's start with the EA. What was the most surprising thing that you found or that you wrote about when it came to the 24-inch gauge and the gavel?
I really like how when you look at the EA tools, it becomes apparent that, Freemasonry isn't just a bunch of knowledge that someone shoveled into a series of instruction books. I don't know how deeply based it is on practical operative lodges, but it would certainly be how I would run an operative lodge. When you get a bunch of new guys who don't know very much, apprentices, and people probably 16 years or old or from other parts of the town, you'd be like, okay, the first thing you're going to have to learn how to do is, figure out how to cut the stone. That's the basic thing. It's going to be yay big by yay big, and it's going to have to be, not smooth. You don't have to make it perfect. You don't have to make it smooth, but it has to have no really sharp, sticky outy bits because this needs to be workable. So, and this is something that you're gonna. It's like we're obviously going to teach you how to do it. You're going to have friends and compatriots and instructors and everything, but really this is something that you have to do. You have to learn how for yourself, and it really translates well into the degrees, because for me the EA degrees are all about perfecting one's relationship with themselves, or if not perfecting, then at least making it useful to the people around you. Certainly with things like good life balance, with the 24-inch gauge, and really getting a hold of some of our more outrageous vices and excesses that we have as human beings. Because if you can't, we don't expect you to have those handled when you join a lodge, but if you can't handle them, eventually, we all rush people through the degrees, in like 3 months. If you get a really
happens, come on.
If you get a really traditional observance lodge, they might rush a person through in 3 years. You will always be working on your EA stuff, though. You'll never stop. So, like I said, don't take this as a challenge that you have to be perfect in any way, because none of us are. But you have to be able to look at yourself and analyze, what is it about me that needs to be fixed.
So basically,
working on those things.
Okay. So basically, when it comes to the EA, you're looking at that as a relationship or improvement of self.
Mm-hmm.
As sort of the primary theme there.
Yep, it's all about the self in the EA, and making your own self not only a more useful stone for you to be put into anything you're building, but for, of course, the house not made with hands, and anybody else's designs that you wish to associate with, or the great architect. So it's definitely entirely related to the self and how you relate to yourself and how you smooth out your own rough edges. Okay.
And you bring up an idea in the book about tribe, society, and self. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So the 24-inch gauge is, on its surface is much about time management. They say 8 hours for 8 hours for your usual avocations, 8 hours for the service of God and his trustworthy brother, 8 hours. I don't know if this is all common knowledge, if this is all esoteric in your state or not. In my state, it's all printed
No,
out.
it's fine in Wisconsin.
But without any abbreviations. So and of course 8 hours for refreshment and sleep, and that fits really well into a 24-inch ruler. It's also like really impossible. And it's, I mean, 8 hours for work, man, it takes me, I have to get up like an hour before work before I can just get myself together to go. It's like, what about my commute time? What about, my lunch that I'm probably going to work through anyway? It's like, and then it's like, and then I'm supposed to worship God for like 8 hours. That's a lot, And then I finally get time to myself. Well, I can eat and sleep. Well, that's not fun, Aside from the fact that these numbers don't match up to a modern life, they just they're very strange. So I like to think that an organization as ancient as Freemasonry wouldn't give us impossible things to do. So I really thought, what are we really getting at? And it occurred to me that that for me, it's more about life balance. And I like to think of, the 24-inch gauge, which we divide into 3 parts, which is not all that different from a triangle. In fact, you can even shape one like a triangle. I've done it. It's super fun. And there's like these three areas of a person's life that they really need to get a hold of. One is their relationship with their self, like the EA degrees, and also your own self-care, your self-maintenance, your own sustenance. Depending, you have to address things like your own mental and emotional health, your physical health, exercise, making sure that you are paying attention to those, because you cannot sacrifice yourself when it comes to these.
Wait, are you saying Masons should exercise?
I know, but believe me, I'm the last person you would think who would be promoting that. But I do think that ideally Masons should probably attend to their physical health. So for me, I took that and I just labeled one of the sides of that triangle self. Then the other one is service to God, which I sort of put a pin in because I think isn't living a good life, isn't it all service to God for me? So I sort of set that aside just for a second and say for a distressed worthy brother, and for me, that's all the people I'm really invested in. My kids, my wife, my family, my brothers, organizations that I belong to that I have a personal invested in. These are my tribe. We talk about in societal discussions, we talk about doing things for your tribe, and Freemasonry is certainly a communitarian tribal thing. We're not looking at tribe as a negative connotation, like we're going to go to war with other tribes, though it certainly happens throughout the history of humanity, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
But it's our community. It's the people that we are and the societies and the organizations we are personally invested in, those institutions that we do. That's our tribe. And we do need to attend to them because we need their support. They need our support. And that ensures that we grow into these strong communities. And the last one, avocations, or vocations, depending on your jurisdiction.
Vocations in Wisconsin.
It's your for me, this is your job. Yes. Because let's face it, most of us aren't doing the thing we most love in the entire world. Most of us are just doing a job and we're like, why do I go to this job? Why do I go work at this bank and do something that seems almost useless for 8 hours? Well, it's not useless to them. Maybe it's not a great job, but they need someone to do it. That's why they're paying someone to do it. And it serves them. Hopefully you're working for a company that isn't actively trying to destroy humanity. But assuming you're not, you're actually doing something that actually serves humanity. If you're working for a bank, you are actually helping to, give people immediate access to their funds basically anywhere in the globe. That's actually pretty impressive. That actually makes life a lot easier for humanity in many ways. That is service to humanity that maybe you don't have a real deep investment in, but you're of service to people on this impersonal level, and that is equally as important. You can't just hide in one. We have such a problem. Masonry knows it more than probably most groups. We have like a big man boy problem. Where people tend to checking out of adulting, and they're maybe staying home just gaming the entire time. They're not dating. They're not and I'm not necessarily putting all the blame on people for doing this. There are legions of reasons why it feels almost useless to go out and get some crappy job and to suffer the slings and arrows of the romantic world. But if you're just doing that, if you're putting all of your emphasis into the self, then you're going to live an unbalanced life. The idea is to keep this triangle that you've made with this 24-inch gauge an equilateral triangle, with where you're putting roughly the same stress on all the different sides, the same, so you're not leaning towards one more than the other. You're not throwing yourself into work at the sacrifice of your family. You're not throwing yourself into, pleasures and, drugs and everything at the sacrifice of being useful to society. You have to have all these things. And if you don't do that, if you don't get those things balanced, then, because for me, God and the service to God, that's really the eye of providence right in the center of that triangle for me. It's if you don't pay enough attention to all these things, you really end up getting this big gap where God is no longer at the center of your life. I think you are best worshiping, and this is my opinion, I'm not going to tell people what to think, but I think you are at your best in being of service to God when you are balancing out all three of these areas of your life.
So in a modern society, though, as you pointed out, we tend to focus on one side more than the other two. So is that a problem? Has that become a big problem in Masonry? Is there a way to deal with that you see? Or is this sort of hey, don't worry about why it's there, just focus on yourself and work on balancing your triangle?
Well, this is why I do say that it's more about attention than it is time, because like we've all worked jobs where maybe for a large span of time, we're going to have to work overtime. We're just going to be stuck at the office for forever and everything. And so when you do come home to your family, you can't just sit on the couch and stare at your phone and ignore your kids and ignore your wife. You're going to have, if you only have a couple hours with them, you're going to have to make that time meaningful. And that's not like, I'm not saying you have to break out Monopoly and spend, but like when your kids walk around, you should look at them when you're talking to them and, set things down and actually be available. I mean, half the job of being a dad is just being available. And that's your kids and your partner knows that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. Just sort of, looking at society and how that, society has shifted more towards the self over the years in this sort of postmodern philosophy that we live in. So that does get to it.
And with Freemasonry, we do have and I've seen this in churches too. So it's not an only Freemasonry. Any organization has this problems with people who get a little bit too enthusiastic. You spend all your time, doing Masonic things, and you never eat dinner at home because you're always at some appendant body or something similar to that. And that's putting way too much emphasis on your tribe. And as long assuming you're maintaining your job and you're not losing it, then that's good. But man, you really do have to you really do have to pay attention, not only to the other side of the tribe, which is your family, but are you doing things for yourself? Are you maintaining, your mental, emotional health? People can get so wrapped up, and Masonry doesn't cause this kind of stuff, like in terms of like bad mental or emotional health. But I've certainly seen Freemasons who don't seem like they're being helped by Freemasonry because something about it stresses them out. They're putting a lot of emotional investment into this kind of thing, and you can just see it. I mean, that it kind of drives them crazy a little bit. And those are the Freemasons that we lose, that are the real shames, because they were willing to put in the work. It's one thing to lose a Mason who didn't show up, but it's another thing to see a guy burn out. And we tend to blame ourselves. Did we ask him to do too much? It's like, maybe, but was he attending to his own life balance? Was he tending to his own self-care? Was he tending to his family? Was he tending to his job? His employment. These are all or his hobbies. We use avocations in Minnesota, which are, for some reason, we use as interchangeable with vocations, even though technically I think avocations means your hobbies. So every jurisdiction's so fun and so different, but we all do it the same, right?
Right.
But yeah, no, hobbies, it's when you're being useful, not just to yourself.
Okay.
And that's another thing you have to watch out for in Freemasonry is my interest in Freemasonry because it's being useful to them, or because it's being useful just to myself? Am I going to lodge because I'm not good at playing video games and I really just want to entertain myself? It's like, it's not an entertainment. It's a sandbox for leadership.
Yeah, and personally, I'm not very good at video games. I lose at Mineshaft. It's horrible.
Yeah.
So,
me too. I gave up during Super Mario Brothers, so
Yeah, I think I go back to the whole original Nintendo and Duck Hunt, and that dog just haunts me. Anyway, so these tools basically boil down to accountability and personal responsibility. Is that a good way to look at it?
Yeah, it's accountability. Certainly, it's for me, it's a self-craft. It reflects in how all the that self, tribe, and society is reflected in all the degrees, in my opinion. But the EA is certainly about it's not even about fixing your problems, although that's a part of it. It's about being aware of them. The first step is to be aware of your challenges and what your specific challenges are as a human being. Does my specific life have any gaps in it when it comes to what I'm paying attention to? Do I have any excesses, any cracks in my facade here that make it really hard for people to lean on me, to support other people, to support a full life?
Okay. And moving to the Fellowcraft, you bring up the idea that the Fellowcraft tools represent mathematical constants.
Yes.
Can you expand on that? Because that seems like a really important idea when looking at those tools.
I would love to. So the immovable jewels of a Freemason, as outlined in one of the first degree lectures, are coincidentally the second degree working tools, the plumb, square, and level. I'm assuming it's the same way in Wisconsin.
It is.
Okay. So what makes them immovable? I've had a few people try to explain this. It was never really to my personal satisfaction. They usually said, well, because they represent the master and the wardens, and there's nothing more immovable than that. And I'm like, really? Because we change them up every year. That seems pretty immovable to me. So think about it this way. What are the movable jewels of a Mason? Do you remember?
Yeah, the ashlar, or sorry, the rough ashlar, the perfect ashlar, and the trestle board.
Right. And see, for me, that makes sense because when you think of movable, I'm going to go with the word changeable, because a rough ashlar, can always be perfected, just like a person can always get better. And a good person can always get worse, which is something we tend to forget. And plans of man, which are represented by a trestle board, can change depending on what we want. They can change on a whim. These things are very movable. In many ways, I think they represent a kind of like a gap in the recording. I'm trying to remember the term. What's that? What's the term for subjective morality? Relative. Okay, so these are in some ways a relativistic moral concept. What is right or wrong to do? Well, that really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Someone who is trying to, the morality of someone who's trying to help humanity survive and thrive is going to be very different than the morality of someone who wants to do things only for himself. These are decisions that you as a human being get to make. Am I going to only live for myself, or am I going to live for my tribe to, conquer the world or be as thrive as possible? Or am I going to live for my species to thrive? Well, all three of those things are going to give you vastly different rights and wrongs based on what you're trying to accomplish. And you get to change your mind in the middle of life. But what you can't change is God's idea of what the universe is for. So when I look at the plumb, square, and level, I look at three things that are basically shortcuts. They're just devices, tools that are shortcuts to do something that is ultimately geometric. Laying horizontals, laying verticals, and making 90-degree angles. And you can make a 90-degree angle with a straight edge and a compass. That's everything can be done in geometry basically with a straight edge and a compass, which is what makes it, in my opinion, a miracle. And the great thing is that what a 90-degree angle is, for instance, what is square is not subject to your whims. You don't get to decide what it is. You might get to decide, what how long a ruler is. A 24-inch gauge is 24 inches. What's an inch? Well, someone decided what it was just because, I don't know, it's like the length of your thumb or something. Like I use an example in the book about cubits, and what the royal cubit is. And that was the distance from the pharaoh's fingertip of his middle finger to his elbow, roughly. And, that's going to change depending on who the pharaoh is, isn't it? So that's the definition of relative morality. Whereas what is a 90-degree angle, though? What's a right angle? Well, that's never going to change. It doesn't matter doesn't matter if you use base 10 math or base 3 math or anything. It doesn't matter how you count it. It's always going to be the same thing. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. That's math. That is going to be the same in every part of the universe with every species. They might state it in a different way using a different language, but it's always going to be the same. And a square is just a quick shortcut to help you know if you have a right angle. And the plumb and the level are derivatives of that. So there is nothing more immovable than that, because it is proof positive that the universe has some kind of order. It's not just a bunch of random mix of stuff. I mean, a lot of the stuff in the middle chamber lecture is pointing to the idea that the universe has some kind of, design or order to it, and, Masons generally believe in, some kind of intelligent designer. It's not universal. Again, we don't have to paint with too broad of a brush. Some people just, people have different ideas of that. But I believe that Freemasonry tends to have opinions, and one is that the plumb score and level represent geometry and mathematical constants that do not change depending on what a person's opinion is, or how your plans change. And so for me, that's the definition of a movable. Yeah.
Yeah. How can we have that sort of constant in a fraternity where we're open to numerous religions, potentially with very diverse moral systems? So how can you take, morality and say that it's a constant when we have different systems of morality through religion?
Mm-hmm. And that's a challenge of Freemasonry, but it's a challenge that is sort of one of the reasons Freemasonry was made. I personally think that Freemasonry does endorse an objective morality version of the universe, the design of an architect. But I've had plenty of brothers who believe in relative morality. I've had brothers who don't believe in morality at all, if you can believe it. They just, they think that there's, I wouldn't say they're nihilists or anything, but they believe that there's like no truth. And that's a valid philosophical concept. How do we square that away with each other? We find it interesting, I think. We don't have to argue about it, because what we have at stake in Freemasonry, we're not instructed to find the one truth. We're sort of going off on the idea that the truth exists, and we're just trying to be good people to help the truth kind of do its thing. I don't think that anyone really, even my friends who don't believe in morality, my one brother who was like that, he didn't come to lodge to F up the system. He came to lodge to become a better person, just like we all did. And we also inherently know, whether it's outlined in our own particular religious text or not, that a key ingredient of being a better person is learning how to get along with people that you do not agree with. I look at my lodge brothers, from my original lodge and my lodge now. I wouldn't be friends with any of these people, if I was just left to my own devices. I wouldn't have anything in common. We would have never even been introduced. And yet I know people from all sorts of different walks of life, and I get to see how they do things, and I get to hear how they talk and everything, and how they approach life. And that is magical. That is just so wonderful. And while I think that personally, there's an objective morality in the universe, you're not required to think that to use, the plumb square and level, because and this is why we do ask that people have a belief in the divine. And I realize that some people's belief in a higher power is abstract and not something they've necessarily examined thoroughly, right, which I encourage everyone to do. But that you would even acknowledge a higher power means that we're not at the top. There's somebody who is above us, who has their own ideas of what this universe was made for. And we're just living in it. That's something that I think is universal to all Freemasons, all regular Freemasons that I'm aware of. Even the particulars of what is right and what is wrong. That's something you look inside your own holy texts for, where you can work out through discussion and even trial and error, I suppose. But that we even acknowledge a higher power in Freemasonry means that there is a purpose to this. They go hand in hand. And when you have a purpose for something, you acknowledge that there are right and wrong, because there's so many things, especially in the modern day, they're trying to remove the concepts that there are right and wrong. I disagree. I don't like it. I don't think it's helpful. I don't think we need to lord over people what we think is right and wrong, but I think we should at least acknowledge that there are better ways and worse ways to do things, which is a form of right and wrong. There's a right way to use a radio or build a radio, and there's a wrong way to do it. If you do it the wrong way, it's not going to work. The universe is the same way. There's a right way to be living in the universe, and there's a wrong way to do it. And if you do it the wrong way, and I think we can all see, we all know people who do it the wrong way, it doesn't work very well. So
if you could if you could explain your ideas around the 5 orders of architecture, you kind of go into 2 different ideas on it, but maybe why don't you start with that idea of the stages of life, those 5 orders representing the stages?
For me, they're the 5 sticky uppy pillars. So that right there for me is a good representation of the plum, which I find it's a lesson that is derivative of the plum, to be upright in the various stages of your life. And I look at the 5 orders, which are, the Tuscan, which is, represents, a very stripped down version of humanity in the text. I don't have the text, sorry, right off my top of my dome there, but it is man in its most basic state, which to me represents that of a child, a person in his rawest state, raw emotions, raw everything, fresh out of the package. Then there's the Doric, which represents a strong, robust male. I think of a young man, military age, in the prime of his life, where he's starting to learn crafts, things like that, and how to live in the world. And then there's the Ionic pillar, which is said to represent a woman, the shape of a woman, and in her hair. And for me, that represents the time when a young man meets a wife and gets married, which is another epoch of their life. The Corinthian, which is the masterpiece of all of them, which they point out is the one that's considered the absolute masterpiece. I like them all, but that to me is when a man gets in his, usually his 40s, even 50s. Which, by the way, if you're in your 30s and you're panicking, you've got time to get your masterwork out. All right. It's like,
or you have time 40s, to panic.
Yeah. You have more time to panic. Yeah. But your 40s are just your 30s with worse knees, basically. So, unless your mastercraft is, squats, then you're fine. It's, for me, in my 40s, that's when I really settled down. In fact, I think it's 43 is the average age that a man matures. I think I heard that. I can back that up with nothing. I just heard that statistic the other day, and it's that seems super late, but it also rings really true. And that's where you finally know what you're doing. It's okay, I understand my job. I'm learning how to do it well. And that's what I think is the master craft of a man. And then the last stage is the composite, which is a composite column is obviously a combination of the Corinthian and the Ionic, which for me is the child. It's having a child to move the combination of the man and the woman, which is what continues on the cycle. Do you have to have a child? No, you do not have to have a child. I like kids. I've got 4 of them myself, but I'm not going to crack the whip on any of this stuff. But I'm saying that for me, the biggest lesson is you have to be upright in all of these stages. You can't live a really crummy life and abuse women and steal money from your job, and then at the very end say, oh no, I'm an old guy, but I'm really, I accept Jesus and I'm really going to be awesome from now on. It's no, you got to do this. You got to do this at every stage. There's no waiting until later to be a better person. It's the one thing that everybody can do basically right now is just
fair. It worked for the Emperor Constantine.
Did it work for the Emperor Constantine? What's the Emperor Constantine up to right now? That's the big question, I suppose. Yes. So, But and you never really know. There's not the fun of death. We just don't know what's there, and that's one of the things I like about Freemasonry is they really don't have much of an opinion on what happens after you die. But just like, better watch it though. Something's happening probably. Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So this is the one time I'm going to get sort of specific here, and I do have the text in front of me if we need to. On page 95, when you talk about the 5 Ors of architecture, you replace the word architecture with the word morality in defining order and architecture. And so when you do that, and I'll just read what it says when you change it, by order and morality is meant a system of all reasons, ethics, and virtues of a moral school, or is the regular arrangements of the self or society, which, united with a school of morality, form a beautiful, perfect, and complete whole. Why did you replace architecture with morality there?
Because I learned at a certain point that when we used terms like architecture and mathematics, that they were really just referring to geometry. And architecture is just the practical application of geometry in a really useful manner. And this is something that, again, not all of my brothers have agreed with me on. I remember one of the smartest Masons that I know, I said, "What'd you think about that?" And he was like, "I don't know that I would agree with that," and that's fine. But for me, it was like, I'm a big fan of accepting the premise. I don't have to agree with an idea to accept it and see where that takes me. And so when I think when I've heard that architecture was just sort of another placeholder word for geometry, and in Freemasonry, geometry is in many ways a placeholder for morality, because much like how morality is doing right and wrong, which is what works and what doesn't work, geometry is much the same way. It's what works and what doesn't. But the best way is like there are certain laws, like the 47th problem of Euclid, how to build a right angle. It's like there's the right way of doing it and a lot of wrong ways of doing it, and all the wrong ways will cause your building to fall down. But the right way of doing it will keep it supported. And so we frequently make allusions in Masonry to geometry with morality. So I'm like, what if I just replaced the word geometry or the word architecture with morality in this, and just skip to the end? How would I rewrite the rest of the sentence? And that's what came out. It's so when I thought of this physical structure of how they're describing this column, I just replaced everything with some moral based or societal based thing that seems like it would have gone with it. And what came out of it was the idea that if you're going to be a moral person, if you're going to have character, if you're going to try to do right from wrong, then just like you have to follow rules in building, not only for structure, but for beauty too. And that's beauty is something we've lost track of in our weird brutalist architecture modern society. It's really sad. That's why I'm always crying whenever I see a Masonic building that looks like a shopping mall or something like that. Not so much anymore, but when I was a young Mason, I was really affected by that, because it was like, these buildings used to be so gorgeous and we just don't do that as much anymore. But that you really need to support morality with things that aren't just dependent on your own yucky and yummy. Morality isn't just what I like and what I don't like. I'm not the arbiter of morality. This is a top-down thing. I get it from my idea of a higher power.
Right.
And while like the Bible and other holy books are really some of the most magnificent teaching books we have, they're not great on specifics. Like, well, how did I decide what's the right thing to do in this exact situation? So we've had, luckily we've had millennia of people trying to work that out. Philosophers who have come up with a lot of great ideas. And specifically the Greeks and the Romans had some real crackerjack ideas about this stuff. And I had just noticed, because like I said, I'm a philosophical conspiracy theorist, and I make connections where possibly they don't exist, that I can connect these things. And I said, well, this morality, the Doric looks like this kind of morality. I think I picked a Greek skepticism for that one. Or excuse me, I can't remember which one I picked anymore. Excuse me. I haven't read my book in 2 years.
What? Greek Stoicism.
Greek Stoicism. Thank you so much. Yeah, the Doric is, for me, represents a Greek Stoicism, which is a little bit different than Roman Stoicism, which I felt worked really well with the Tuscan, since the Tuscan was based on the Doric anyway. And just like Roman Stoicism is based on Greek Stoicism, which in Greek is more robust and personal, and Roman is more, I would say, practical in its use, more instructional. And I just noticed that all of these things kind of worked as some other form of philosophy, virtue ethics from Plato's virtue Aristotle's virtue. Yeah, is who the whole concept of virtue ethics is to pick the mean between two extremes, or on both sides. So it's like, bravery is the middle choice between foolhardiness and cowardliness, and that's the whole thing about virtue ethics, is you want to pick the middle one, so roughly that you're doing a good job. And the Ionic is
Aristotle's Nicodemean ethics, virtue ethics.
Yep. So yeah. So, and because that's like, it's a mean between the two. It's described as that. And I think Epicurean really came up as, for me, the Corinthian.
Yeah.
Because, the Corinthian is considered the height of beauty, and Epicureanism is, which I think is better described nowadays as utilitarianism. I'm sure philosophers would probably skewer me for comparing the two, but they seem kind of the same to me. It's what generates the most happiness. I think, either in yourself or in society at large. What creates the most happiness, what creates the most satisfied customers, I suppose, when it comes to that. And I thought that really worked. And the composites, for me, really looked like Via Romana, which was more just, hey, here's a list of virtues, we're going to pick them, kind of like the Scout, the 12 points of Scout Law or something like that. La Via Romana was like a list of, like, I don't even know how many, 20, 30 virtues. I think I wrote them down there.
Yeah, I think you wrote out 26 public virtues of a society.
Yeah, just do these things and you're fine. Which it's kind of funny, because the Romans really do sort of come across as copycats. Like, they're obviously sitting next to the Greeks in school and copying off their tablets there. I
usually refer to them as Lady Gaga, constantly borrowing from everyone else and not crediting.
A little bit, maybe just a little bit. And so, it is to the Greeks and not the Romans that we are indebted to everything, good, moral, and judicious, and all those wonderful things. I just thought they fit in really well. And I've always been a proponent that you really should have you should adhere to some school of philosophy. It doesn't matter which one. It doesn't matter if it's one of those five. Pick one. There are a lot of them out there. The point is that when you act, here's just the sad reality. You're going to do whatever you feel, and then you're going to justify it later. That's how things work. We all like to think that.
Wait. Are you saying post hoc rationalization is a thing?
What? If you ask any human being, especially a Mason, what percentage of your decision making is rational and what percentage of your decision making is emotional, they're going to be like, 90-10, 95-10 rational. It is not. It is the opposite. This has been studied. This has been clocked. This is just true. We all make decisions based on yucky and yummy, how we feel. And most of us just leave it at that, and then we rationalize it in some way. Well, I did that because, as long as you had a good reason to get away with it, that'll work. And then that's how you've defined your morality. Well, that's fine if you're of the sort who says that I'm the highest power and I can do whatever I want. But if you have, a higher power who's giving you instructions, or if you have a system, much like Freemasonry is a system of ethics that you can compare, it's like, okay, I'm a big utilitarian. Did what I did really create the most happiness for everybody? Oh, it didn't? Okay, well, I'm just going to sit with that and see how it feels to me. It's like I did something that I thought was right at the time, but maybe wasn't the best thing to do. Because the only way you're really going to change your behavior is if you can sit with those feelings, let them process in you, and change the way you feel about a thing. And that's a practice thing. And we don't, again, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's like we're expected to know the right thing to do as soon as we shoot out of our mother's womb here, and we're held to that standard, in schools and work and everything. And the truth is that we're all that being good is entirely a matter of practice, entirely.
So to boil it down a little bit, what you're basically arguing is that there has to be a structure where we use this structure, framework, morality, to make decisions, and we have it before we make the decision. We consult it before we make the decision. Otherwise, we end up in post hoc rationalization, just kind of coming up with a good excuse for why we did what we did.
Not quite.
Okay.
You will never get away from post hoc rationalization, is my point. You will always make decisions based on your emotions. The only time you can make a decision based on rationalization is if you really don't care about the topic. It's like if you find two people at a bar who don't care about racism, they're really good at solving racism. They can do it in a half hour. If you find two people who don't care about abortion one way or the other, they can solve the problem of abortion really quickly. It's caring about these things that causes us to not want to solve the problem, because we actually are emotionally invested. If you're emotionally invested in any concept, you're really going to obey your feelings on it. That is unavoidable. What I'm saying is during your post hoc rationalization phase, if instead of just rationalizing it with whatever excuses you can get, if you can actually measure it against a standard, a more objective standard, and in this way, if I'm rationalizing this against Nicomachean ethics, which is a more objective standard than I can, pull out of my butt, then I'm better informed as is what I did. Did that follow my own values? And if it didn't, you're going to feel a little yucky about it. You're going to feel like, oh, I'm kind of a hypocrite. Oh, I'm kind of the a-hole in this situation, wasn't I? And that feeling is what's going to eventually change how you react to things. So you need to practice feeling either really good about the decision you made or really bad about it, depending on your post-game analysis. And then that's going to slowly, through a lot of practice, tug you into being a more character-driven person, a person who is consistent with their actions, are consistent with their values. Does that make sense?
It does. It sounds like what you're saying is the reflection on decisions or things that we've done is the important part that I was missing when I said, applying morals to our decisions to avoid post hoc. It's not about avoiding the post hoc. It's about reflecting on those ideas and doing better next time. Yes.
It's not about avoiding, the post hoc, because it's because, like I said, unless we don't care, we can't make a rational decision at the outset. We can only act, and then, one thing we can all do, ideally, especially as Masons, is really sit silent and circumspect and reflect on what we did. And as long as we have something we can measure that against, what would Jesus do? What would my dad do? What would Aristotle or Socrates do? It's just something like that. What would Immanuel Kant have said about this? Whatever whatever philosophical school has tickled our own fancy in our past, and we thought, well, that's the kind of philosophy I like. If you find that you're acting not in accord with that, then that reflection is going to help improve you. And the next time you do this, you're going to be better armed. This is where I do kind of like alchemy in a sense, because life is a series of distillations. You do something, you distill it down, and you see what you got. Did I crack the code? Did I get gold or the prima materia? Nope. Okay, well, I'm gonna try it again. I'm gonna get better results next time. Keep distilling, keep practicing.
So when you talk about the level, you say equality is not a Masonic value, which is the sort of thing that you might hear and go, wait a minute, isn't that completely the opposite of what we stand for? So can you expand on that?
Yes, that's called clickbait, except it's in a book. No, it's specifically what I mean is that creating equality is not a Masonic value. Because for me, when I think of the level, I also think of another tool that we don't use. And I wondered for a long time, why didn't we use the lever as a tool? The lever is probably one of the most useful tools in architecture, and I would assume even Freemasonry or an operative masonry that you can get. It's a big long stick and a fulcrum, and if you have a long enough stick, you can literally move anything. It's like how were the pyramids built? Well, probably with levers, because a human being can lift a 2-ton block if they have a long, sturdy enough stick and a fulcrum to do it with. It's just physics. And think, well, that's really useful. Why don't we like that? Well, because the lever is all about making unequal things equal. And that's not a Masonic value. So when I apply that to a lodge, you're going to get lodge brothers from all different walks of life. One lodge brother is going to be rich because of an inheritance. One lodge brother is going to be maybe rich because he's a hardworking businessman or a doctor or something. Plenty of lodge brothers are going to be, on just this side of destitute, or they're going to have different IQs. They're going to have different talent stacks. They're going to have different bodies. They're going to have different abilities. We have to make sure that we're not demanding inequality of results, because everybody's going to be born with a different starting spot. What Freemasonry reveres is not the lever where we take two people and we try to panel beat them into being equal in some way. We accept the truth that they are already equal because they are both on a level. It doesn't matter how big or impressive one perfect ashlar is compared to another one. If they're both sitting on a level, no one's going to slide into the other and collapse them, because isn't that really ultimately why we are so wary of people who we view as being so much more skilled than us or so much richer than us? Is that ultimately we're worried that, like a stone on an uneven surface, they're going to slide into us and crush us to death in some way societally. We don't have to worry about that in Freemasonry, because we all exist on a level playing field. So it doesn't matter how much more weight, and define that any way you want, one has over the other. They're considered equal in the sense that they're both on a level plane, and not one of them is in any real danger of harming the other one. No one's gonna tip the scales.
Okay.
And I just think we need to sit with that. See, some of the tools give you specific directions, and some of the tools are really just for mulling over under a new way. And those are some of actually the ones I like the best. And for me, the level is one where it's sort of defined by what it isn't, not by necessarily what it is. Yes, we all know treat people equally. We've known that for a long time. That used to be pretty controversial in the world. We used to get nailed to a tree for saying maybe we should all be nice to each other. That doesn't happen as much anymore. A little bit, not as much, but it's something that we all sort of understand. But when I think of the trowel, I think of actually building a physical wall, because that's, sort of what the tool alludes to, is spreading that cement of brotherly love that unites, these bricks, blocks, ashlars into one common mass. And my take on the trowel actually comes from a reading of Pillars of the Earth. Have you ever read the book or seen the
I have
movie?
not.
Great movie for a Mason. Great book. Super long, but it's pretty entertaining, and it's about operative Masons. They don't get into Freemasonry and all, but it's just, the main character is an operative Mason building a cathedral, and it's it's all about this cathedral he's building in this town over like 20-30 years. His son takes over from him and everything, and they said something that I did not know, and I don't know if it's true. Obviously, I got it out of a fiction book, but it sounds kind of true. Do you know what the purpose of mortar and cement is in a wall?
No.
See, most people would say it's a glue to stick the bricks together. That's not the case. The bricks will stick together because of gravity, Right. What the mortar does is they evenly distribute the weight of the bricks above them, so they can support the weight of the building, which I thought was really fascinating. So when I translate that to what we have in a lodge, and spreading that cement of brotherly love, is it to unite us all into one common mass? Yes, it does act like a glue and everything, but what it's really for is so that brotherly love is there to absorb the shocks of disharmony, so we can support our brothers, so we can support the institution. The brotherly love is not just the glue that holds it together, but the thing that allows us not to be crushed by the enormous weight of problems that life brings. So I sort of interpret it as, if you want to be able to support people and be supported by people, think of yourself as a brick in a wall. You should support, and I give actionable advice on this. You should. I would say, just like if you can pick any brick out of a wall, they sort of have a staggered pattern. Every brick in the wall is touching 6 other bricks. It's sitting on 2 bricks, it's supporting 2 bricks, and it has a brick on its left and a brick on its right. I think that's a great way to go through lodge. I think you should, because a lot of us get shy, a lot of us don't know where we fit in. I'd say find 2 brothers that you can find that will support you, and more so than just all brothers support each other in theory. 2 people that you can go to together or separately who will help listen to your problems and support you. If you can find that, you're golden. Also, be that person for at least 2 other brothers. Open yourself up to that. Again, beyond just, I support all my brothers. It's easy to say. Find 2 brothers if you can, or be open definitely to 2 people who are having problems, or who you want to be that go-to person for advice. And also, especially in these charged political times, I'd say have a person on your left and a person on your right. It's, unless you're like extremely extreme on one way or the other and there's no one on your left or right.
It seems like a very controversial idea in today's day and age.
Yeah, well, it is a controversial idea that, God forbid, we might actually want to have people surround ourselves with people with different ideas. That can get you nailed to a tree, I suppose, nowadays. But I think it's a good idea. Agreement is never a requirement in Freemasonry, and that's why I really like it. It's like you just listen and be skeptical and communicate for clarity. If you can be good friends with someone on your socio-political left and right, you got it made. You're in a good balance, or at least someone that you view as on your left or right. And of course, we're all very diverse in our opinions. I don't think I know anybody who's all one or the other nowadays. So it's all the tools are right there, and if you can do that, you're building a wall that will support the enormous weight of the institution of Freemasonry.
So the EA is about developing ourselves. The FC is about developing society, I guess you might say.
I would say that it's about our tribe, and it's about how the entered apprentice is how we relate to ourselves.
Okay.
The fellow craft is how we relate to another brother. Dealing square with them, how you treat them, how you improve your character and your ethics. That's how you. So it's just like how you and I are treating each other right now. And the Master Mason degree is how you build a society, how you all finally bring it together and work together to build an organization, to build humanity. That's where it all sort of comes together. So it's just like, our original tool. It's self, tribe, and society.
All right. It's an interesting look at it because frequently it's looked at as the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. But self, tribe, and society is another very interesting way of sort of looking at and interpreting the whole of the ritual.
Mm-hmm. And again, no one's wrong because it was Masonry is intentionally obscure. So it's like if anyone ever thinks that they have the correct answer, just like laugh and walk away because they don't.
So you also deal with a couple of other tools after the Master Mason, and one of them is the compass. And isn't the self-control taught by the compass the same as the self-control taught by the gavel? What's really the difference between those two?
Yeah, and it's the compass is a weird tool because it is a working tool. I think it's undeniable that it's a working tool. We teach lessons about it, but we don't slip it into any specific degree. It's just sort of always there. So I put it in the Master Mason degree just because A, the trial is lonely, and B, because I think it's a great tool for how to grow as a human being, but do so in a way that keeps you from being overwhelmed. And that's a critical tool when it comes to building societies for me.
Wait a minute. So you're saying growing as a human being without being overwhelmed,
right? It's hard. I do differentiate it a bit from the self-control of the gavel. For like I said, the gavel is really about vices and superfluidities or
superfluities.
Yeah, we'll just go with that one.
Yeah.
So like these are things like it's like, oh, I want to be a guy, but I'm an alcoholic. I should probably tap. Oh, I want to be this, but man, I just love. It's like I play Dungeons and Dragons literally every night of the week. Great thing to do, but man, that's going to get in the way. It's like this might be a superfluidity that you have to deal with here, because it's you need to sort of. I'm not useful to society if I'm chock full of things that make me hard to deal with, like addictions, like serious character flaws, like serious traumas that if you triggered, you do end up falling to pieces and everything. Those are the kinds of things that works with. For the compass, it's for me, it's more about how we learn, how we grow that which we can control, and how we separate it from that which we cannot control, and learn how to keep that border. Because if we don't do that, then you can quickly find yourself overwhelmed by other people or other things like your job, for instance. It's a compass. It inscribes what you're supposed to. You're responsible for everything within the points of the compass, right?
Right.
So everything within the points of the compass is something that you should be able to control in some way. Something, and control can mean like knowledge of this and that and everything. I never liked that it sort of kind of sounded like, mind your business, mind your P's and Q's, just do, it's like know your role, shut your mouth kind of a thing. That's what it kind of came across to me when I first heard it. It's like, well, that seems a little limiting. But for me, what it is if I can inscribe around me everything that a circle that represents everything I can control. And then I think, okay, well, how do I increase this? Obviously, I want to increase what I know, my knowledge, my education, my capabilities. These are all things that I can control. Well, you're going to want things. It's obviously so. Okay, so I'll make a circle around me. That's the things that I want. And this is not going to be something that's easy to explain in a podcast. That's why I have many handy dandy illustrations in the book. This is the hardest tool to actually relay verbally. I've noticed whenever I've talked about it. But essentially, when what you want vastly outstrips what you control, you find that you can be controlled by other things. I want a bunch of money and I want success at my job. I can only control so much about my job. Ergo, you run the risk of, like your boss, for instance, who controls more about your job than you do. If he knows that you want to go up the corporate ladder, for instance, then he has what you want, which means that he controls how much of it you can get.
Right.
So in many ways, he controls you. If what you need and it outstrips what you can control so much, and what he controls is so broad that he can actually sort of envelop you in his little circle of control, then he ends up controlling you. And the fastest way to become a depressed person is to lose control of your life. That's what depression often comes down to, is the feeling that I have no control over where I'm going or what I do. So, we hate our jobs, not because our job is particularly bad, but because I feel like I have no way to direct where my job is going to go or what promotions I might have. For the longest time, I worked it was a mid job, but it was for really bad pay at a company that wasn't treating employees very well. And I worked there for a decade because I hate job hunting. And I just sort of put my trust. I let someone else have the control of my future at this company. I just sort of assumed that my manager, who seemed like a nice guy, was keeping an eye out for me and would put me in the best spots. Turns out managers don't really do that. At least ones that aren't very good. They're more concerned about their own things. And eventually I had to. I felt I was being consumed by all the problems with that job, and I had to leave. And I just ended up quitting. And that was a terrifying thing because I hate job hunting. But I did a little job hunting, and eventually, in fairly short order, it turned out I was qualified for a job that was actually really, really good. Got paid a lot of money, and now I have like almost entirely control over that aspect of my life. And wouldn't you know it, my depression about work went away because I'm in control of it now. It's within my scope of control, and for me, the compass is a really good illustrator for how to look at that. But it's something you really got to buy the book and look at the illustrations on, because it's a little bit it's too hard for me to always. It's something that needs a whiteboard, put it that way.
Yeah, that's where you were using the Venn diagrams.
A lot of Venn diagrams. I love me a good Venn diagram, but yeah.
So moving beyond sort of the material of the book itself, kind of getting to a bit of a conclusion, what happens if we learn and apply all of these? Do we reach some kind of Masonic enlightenment? Do we visit Kurt Cobain and Nirvana?
Yes, you will float off the ground. That's how you know you did it right. You will actually hover above the ground. And no,
Is it
You know
even
what
possible?
yeah. And here it is. You know what I hear from people who have aged, like we are all aging, but people who get older and older, and it's funny because one of the things that kept me from joining Freemasonry for a long time is I didn't want to be surrounded by elderly people. I don't know why. They freaked me out, or at least they did when I was much younger. It's I'm not saying that was a vice of mine. There's something about I couldn't relate to them, and I really wanted to find a lodge with a lot of young guys, and I did find a lodge with a lot of young guys, and I thought, oh, that's great. Freemasonry is, we're bending more towards the young, and we are. That's great. We're attracting a lot of young people, and now I'm getting to be one of the older guys in the lodge. So it's like, oops. But one thing that I learned about people as they age, and why they're often happier than younger people, is because the older you get, the more you want to do things for other people. And the younger you are, conversely, the more you want things done for you or to do things for yourself. So this book, for me, like the ultimate nirvana here, is you learn how to be a better person. And not because, I'm so moral and I'm telling you how to be a better person because I'm just like basically Jesus. I'm not. I'm as crummy of a Mason as everyone else. That I'm giving you techniques so you can fix yourself, a toolbox, so you can actually say, okay, here are my challenges. I've identified them. Here are specific things I can do, techniques, advice, specific scenarios, specific things I can do to actually come out on top and be a better person. And you're never going to be finished. You're just going to keep on doing that. Distill. It's always going to be better. You're going to practice and everything. But eventually you're going to reach a point where you're like, I feel like I'm finally in a position where I can take a lot of the focus off myself and, who am I? And, all those philosophical questions we ask ourselves, who art thou and everything. And I can just turn my attention more towards my tribe and my society. I'm good. It's like you're always going to keep track of yourself and tend to your self-care. But if you can get to the point where you're now paying it forward to your brothers, to your family, to your kids, to your friends, to people at your work, that you're helping take people under your wing, that you're having your own apprentices, not just Masonic, but in life, that's where you get the rewards, because that's what we need. We need people who are actually master Masons, who actually are not just so by title, but because they've mastered these working tools. And there are two tools that I don't know if I actually mentioned them at the end of the book, but I do like talking about it nowadays. Well, I mentioned one of them obviously is the compass. The other one's just a straight edge. I feel like real masters should always carry these things, because you can build anything with a compass and a straight edge. You can just design it. You can design anything in the real world that can stand up to the storm. You can design it with a compass and a straight edge. And I think if you master these tools, you can take up your compass and your straight edge, and you really can then design shelter for others. You can design temples for others, and hell, get esoteric, as above, so below. You in some ways you give glory to the creator by emulating them as much as possible, in the sense, not in like a, I'm God and you will live and die underneath my scalpel sense, but in the sense of I'm going to build things, a world that for my family and friends and society that will be better than it was when I found it. That's your nirvana. That's the secret of life.
I find it interesting. You bring up the compass and straight edge. And I frequently, when I'm teaching art history, I tell my students, when you look at ancient architecture, pyramids, Stonehenge, Katahoyok, any of these sites in any society, virtually all of them can be built with two things. And it doesn't matter how complicated it is: a stick and a string, which basically boils down to a straight edge and a compass.
That's what it is.
So it's very interesting that the ancients had it right, and we have to be reminded of it today.
Mm-hmm. And and that's the best thing about it, is that we all have the ability to be that kind of master. And maybe some of our temples will be bigger than others, but we can all design anything with a straight edge and a compass. And so and that really comes down to, we don't use the straight edge obviously as a working tool. I feel like if we're going to slip anything into there, we probably should, but it's just like, I guess in the sense that a straight edge is just a really good sense of who you are, and the compass is a really good sense of what you can do, for me.
Fantastic. And how would Freemasonry change if we all applied these lessons to our lives, or the general Masonic lessons to our lives, versus simply being Masons?
Well, that's the problem, because none of us are particularly great at being great people. Even Masons are maybe better than most people, but not by a lot, in my opinion. I've been scolded by brothers for having such a dour view of it, but it's like, I'm sorry, I've met a lot of Masons, and they're not all great guys. That's just my lived reality. You can't question it.
Know Bob too, then, huh?
I do know Bob.
Yeah.
But my guy's name is Steve, and you can't fight every battle, obviously, and no one person's going to make Freemasonry better. We're all just fighting our own little battles here, and the best thing you can do is exactly what Freemasonry tells you to: improve yourself. When you see someone who's not doing a great job, whisper good counsel into their ear. Don't shout at them. Please don't threaten them with Masonic charges unless they've actually earned it. It's like, if someone taking swings at your brothers, that's the appropriate time to do that, I suppose. But otherwise, you just you do your best with what you have. Tend to your working tools and the mastery of those. I think everybody should have this book. Not because I want to get rich. If I could just snap my fingers and give it to every Mason, I would, because I really do think it is the best book ever written about how to use Freemasonry to make yourself a better person, in my opinion. I mean, that's what I set out to do, and I think I accomplished it. I would love if everybody got handed this book by their lodge the minute they were raised. I think we would be in a much better position, and you can bring it to lodge, read it, and tear it up, in front of everybody, and about how stupid I am. That's fine. As long as you're thinking about right and wrong, that's the goal. It's the road. That's more important than destination in some ways. A lot of this is just is practicing and thinking about it.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And honestly, the podcast is the same way, where, we're putting ideas out there, but it doesn't mean there's the right idea or the right interpretation. I'm just trying to get people to think.
Mm-hmm. No, that's why I enjoy accepting the premise so much. Once you do that, you can get a lot out of it than just saying, oh, well, I'm just going to throw that premise out and not have to think about it. No, even if it's wrong, accept it and see where it takes you. Because you're going to find all sorts of fun things that you can mine from that quarry. So
what I want to do is give you a couple of minutes, enter into Nuance Corner, to tease out anything we should know that we didn't cover, or anything that you feel should be emphasized. So the floor is yours.
Oh, man, I think we covered the whole book. I don't think anyone needs to buy it anymore.
Oh, fantastic. We've just saved them $18.95.
I guess. No, it's I would say that let me take a look. I wouldn't say I've gotten a lot of flack about this, but I think most people want to give me flack, probably keep it to themselves, like a good Mason probably should in some way, not just go around insulting me. Is that I think people worry that and this is sort of a paradox between all the super secretive lessons of Freemasonry and all the books that are written about them that are perfectly available in your public library. But do I give away too many things about Freemasonry. And I certainly pay attention to my own Grand Lodge's specific rules on what you can and can't talk about. I don't know if this book complies with every state to do that. I couldn't possibly, understand that. I mean, there's some states that you just can't talk about anything. But my state, we can only not talk about 3 specific things, and I don't talk about any of them. But for me, the philosophy of that, I talk freely about the tools, because I believe philosophy belongs to everybody. And so I have no issues with a non-Mason reading this book. I have an issue if the non-Mason wants to maybe be a Mason. I don't want to spoil all the fun for you, because the experience is where so much of the value is. But if you're a person who for some reason cannot become a Freemason, maybe you don't believe in God, or you're a woman and there's no like co-Masonry in your area, or I don't know, maybe, it's like for all sorts of reasons, you can still get a lot out of Masonic philosophy. So I think everyone should have at least access to that. It's better if it's done in a large setting, but if you can't do that, then philosophy belongs, again, to everybody in humanity. That said, if you do want to be a Mason, this is certainly something that you should. It's sort of like the criticism that some people have of Freemasonry for Dummies or other books like that. It's a great book, but you need to stop reading it halfway through, And I agree with that. And this is something and this is why I give certain directions at the beginning of this book. If things do interest you, certainly close the cover rather than continue, because this is all. And what point I suppose I'm getting at is that, I had a brother tell me, he was talking about the ancient mystery schools in Greece, and he said that there were 2 kinds of secrets at the mystery schools. There were secrets you could tell and secrets you couldn't tell. And by that, he meant there were secrets that you shouldn't tell, but you physically could tell somebody. And if you told somebody, you'd get your throat cut or something like that, as it was ancient Greece. And there are secrets that, try as you might, you could never express to people, because there's a mystic tie. There's that certain, what the French call an I don't know what about it that you just can't relay in words. You have to experience it. And Freemasonry is certainly one of those things. But one thing I tell people when they think, well, why do I need to join a lodge when, you have all the information for the philosophy right here? It's like, well, I'm not saying the philosophy is not helpful to you, but this stuff needs to be experienced. And if you can't join a lodge, then find a group of friends in any way where you can experience fellowship. I think fellowship is one of the most overlooked tools of Freemasonry. It is possibly the greatest one. It is. If you told me, what can you have, Matt? You get to pick one. You can either have really great ritual, really great education, or really great fellowship. I'm going to pick fellowship every time, because everything that we learn can only be practiced. And again, it's all about practice makes perfect with morality. It can only be practiced in a group full of people. So if you do not have a robust fellowship in your lodge, that's the first thing I think you have to look at. If you're listening and you're thinking of joining a lodge, because it's like, don't be afraid to say I need a lodge because I need friends. Our society is designed at this point, it's become obvious, to keep us apart from being friends, and that's so sad, because you need it. You need support groups, you need brotherhoods and societies. You just need them. They do so much good, because Freemasonry is a sandbox for practicing various kinds of leadership. That's what it's for. And leadership can mean all sorts of different things, as even leading yourself by learning and educating yourself. So all this information is great to have. it is worthless if it is not applied in a group of brothers. So that would be the thing that I would most want to express to people that we haven't really touched on, is how important the brotherhood itself is.
All right. And if anyone's looking for the book, where can they find it?
They can go to practicalfreemasonry.com, where it'll pop up on the front page, and it'll send them to Amazon, which is the current retailer which sells it. Or they can search for it on Amazon.com if they want to skip right to that thing. But practicalfreemasonry.com would be the best way to usually go and find it.
All right. And any other books that you want people to know about?
At this time, no. Like I said, I have things that I may be putting out, I may not. It sort of depends on. I really hate to think that it depends on how enthusiastic of a response I get. But like I said, I don't do this for money. I do this because I want to help people be better brothers and live better lives. So if any of this stuff has helped you do that, please drop me a line. Write to me at matt@practicalfreemasonry.com, or anything. It's just leave a good review, or even a bad review on my on the Amazon page. Feedback is terribly important for this stuff, because that's how I know that I'm building a temple, for as I get older, for other people. So I hope it's certainly something that people are enjoying. I'm always delighted when I get in a random call or an email saying, hey, your book turns out to be really popular in my state. It's like, oh, wow.
Well, it's becoming increasingly popular in Wisconsin. So,
well, Wisconsin's a great town, great state. I've hung around the La Crosse area a lot, and I got no issues with the Packers. So.
Well, La Crosse is kind of Wisconsin. We're kind of suspicious of those characters.
That's the best I can do for you right now. I'm
sorry. So thank you, Brother Gallagher, for joining us. And it's been an enlightening conversation about Masonry and your book, Practical Freemasonry, which leaves it for me to say thank you for joining me, Brother Chris Lidke, and the entire Further Light team on your quest to find more light through Masonry.
Are you interested in learning more about Freemasonry in Wisconsin? Visit wisconsinmasons.org to learn more about Masonry and access further educational content and more light. Once again, that address is wimasons.org. Any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email us at education@wisconsinmasons.org. And thank you for listening.